Maplewood was the kind of town where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Nestled between quiet hills and thick woods, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name. Neighbors smiled as they passed, and the biggest scandal in recent memory was a teenager spray painting the school mascot. It was peaceful, predictable, and safe, or so everyone thought. Hannah Coleman was Maplewood's pride and joy. At 16, she had the kind of presence that lit up any room she entered. She was effortlessly kind, had a natural charm, and always went out of her way to make others feel seen. Teachers adored her, friends admired her, and parents pointed to her as an example for their own children. She was the lead in every school play, the top of her class in literature, and a regular volunteer at the community library. Hannah had dreams of becoming an actress one day, maybe even a screenwriter. She wrote short stories in her free time, and kept a journal filled with poetry and little sketches of her life in Maplewood. Her parents, Linda and Martin, worked long hours, Linda as a nurse at the local clinic, and Martin running a hardware store. Their schedules often clashed with school events or late-night rehearsals, but there was always someone who stepped in for them, Uncle Darren. Martin's younger brother, Darren Coleman, had been like a second parent to Hannah for as long as she could remember. He was always there, standing in the crowd with his arms crossed, a proud smile on his face as he watched Hannah perform on stage or accept another academic award. His presence was constant. Whenever her parents couldn't make it, Darren did. Everyone said how lucky Hannah was to have an uncle like him. Darren was 38 years old, unmarried, and lived alone on the outskirts of town, in a modest farmhouse surrounded by trees. He ran a small auto repair shop and was well known in town for being reliable and friendly. His customers trusted him, and his neighbors liked him. He was the kind of man who helped fix a flat tire without asking for payment and brought pies to the annual town bake-off, even though he didn't cook them himself. But above all, what people admired most was how devoted he was to Hannah. The two were inseparable. He'd pick her up from school when her parents were busy, drive her to piano lessons, help with her science projects, and even take her to the movies on weekends. They had inside jokes, matching bracelets from a summer fair, and dozens of selfies together on social media. The town saw their bond as heartwarming, an uncle going the extra mile for his niece. In a world filled with absent parents and broken families, their relationship was considered wholesome. As she grew older, Hannah still leaned on Darren for support. She confided in him about her dreams, fears, and frustrations. She talked about the pressure of being perfect all the time, the anxiety of always being watched and praised, and how she sometimes wished she could just be a normal girl. Darren always listened. He encouraged her, made her laugh, and told her she was special, that she should never dull her shine to make others comfortable. What no one saw was how that bond gradually shifted over time. Hannah didn't notice at first, and neither did anyone else. But subtle changes crept in, the way Darren's compliments lingered, how his hugs lasted just a second too long, how his tone would change when they were alone. He began to text her more frequently, even late at night. Sometimes the messages were about her safety or schoolwork, but other times they were more personal, more emotional. At first she thought nothing of it. After all, Darren was her favorite person. He had always been there for her. He wasn't like other adults. He understood her, but gradually her behavior changed. People noticed. Her best friend, Mia, said, "She stopped hanging out after school. Her teachers said she was more distracted, turning in assignments late and falling asleep during class. Her once colorful wardrobe became muted. Her Instagram account, once filled with selfies and joyful snapshots of her life, became quiet. At home, she barely spoke during dinner. Her mother worried, but assumed it was just part of growing up, a phase. Despite her distance from others, Hannah still spent time with Darren, more than ever, in fact. Weekends were often spent at his farmhouse. She would tell her parents she needed space or time to focus on schoolwork. They trusted her. After all, where else would she be safer than with Uncle Darren? The farmhouse was old but cozy. Surrounded by woods, it gave off a quiet, isolated charm. Inside, Darren kept the place neat, with pictures of Hannah and family members on the walls. In her room, a guest bedroom decorated just for her, there were old teddy bears, stacks of books she liked, and a blanket embroidered with her initials. It was her sanctuary, or so it seemed. What no one realized was that this sanctuary had become a cage. Something changed between them, something deeply wrong. A line was crossed, and Hannah, too afraid or too confused to fully understand, kept it buried. She didn't speak of it to anyone. How could she? To the world, Darren was the perfect uncle. He was trusted, loved, respected. Who would believe her if she said something was off? As the months passed, her emotional turmoil grew. Her journal entries, once filled with dreams and stories, became scattered and dark. Her poems were about betrayal, silence, and broken innocence. She wrote about guilt, fear, and feeling trapped. Still, she never named names. Her pain remained hidden in metaphors and coded lines. No one noticed the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. Her family thought she was stressed. Her friends assumed she was going through something personal. Even Hannah didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. She only knew that things weren't right anymore, and that the one person she had trusted the most was the source of her confusion. Maplewood continued with its quiet rhythms. Kids played in parks, parents attended PTA meetings, and the townspeople lived their lives unaware that beneath the surface something was terribly wrong. And in the center of it all was a girl who had been everyone's pride, slowly unraveling under the weight of a secret no one suspected. By the time anyone realized, it was already too late. It started with a faint dizziness that Hannah brushed off as nothing serious. A few missed meals, some late nights, maybe stress from school. She had convinced herself it was just exhaustion. But the symptoms didn't go away. The morning nausea came like clockwork, followed by strange food cravings and emotional swings that made her cry without reason. She told no one. Not her friends, not her parents, not even Darren. She just kept pretending everything was fine, smiling when people looked and withdrawing when they turned away. As the weeks passed, her body changed in quiet, terrifying ways. Her clothes started to feel tight. Her once flawless skin grew pale, and the dark circles under her eyes deepened. She stopped participating in drama club. She skipped the school play she had worked so hard on. People whispered about her behind her back, wondering why the perfect girl seemed to be falling apart. Hannah could feel their eyes on her in the hallways, judging her silence, her absence, her tired face. Still, she said nothing. She had taken a pregnancy test in secret. 2, actually. She bought them from a small pharmacy on the edge of town where no one would recognize her. Both came back positive. When she saw the results, her heart stopped. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the test on the bathroom floor. The lines were clear. There was no mistake. Panic set in. Thoughts raced through her head. She was only 16. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had never even imagined being a mother. And worse, she knew exactly who the father was. The shame of it weighed down on her like a tidal wave, threatening to crush her every time she breathed. Telling her parents was out of the question. She couldn't bear the disappointment, the fury, the pain. She feared they would never look at her the same again. They'd ask who was responsible, and she couldn't bring herself to say the name. Not him, not Uncle Darren. He had been her protector, her confidant, the one person she trusted above everyone else. But things had shifted. What began as innocent, affection had slowly become confusing, then frightening. What was once safety had turned into something she didn't fully understand, something that left her feeling used and scared. When he touched her now, it wasn't comforting. It was cold, calculated. It wasn't love. It was control. She had known it was wrong, but she hadn't known how to escape it. Now the truth was inside her, growing. A secret that couldn't be hidden for long. Weeks dragged on. She avoided everyone. She stopped answering messages. Her mother grew concerned and tried to schedule doctor appointments, but Hannah always refused. "I'm just tired," she said. "I'm fine. Just overwhelmed. With school." The lies came easily now, practiced and hollow. Each time she spoke them, a little piece of her broke away. Her only plan was to wait. Maybe it would all go away. Maybe she would wake up and realize it was a dream. But reality has a way of creeping in no matter how tightly you close your eyes. One cold morning, as she was walking to class, her vision blurred. The fluorescent lights of the hallway seemed to spin, and her knees buckled beneath her. Students screamed as she collapsed onto the floor. By the time the nurse reached her, Hannah was unconscious. At the hospital, the truth came out. Quickly. The doctors discovered she was nearly 4 months pregnant. Her parents were stunned. They stood at her bedside, confused and frantic, demanding answers. Hannah opened her eyes slowly and refused to speak. When the nurse gently asked who the father was, she turned her face away. The silence was unbearable. Her mother cried. Her father paced the hallway. When the police were informed, a social worker was assigned. The hospital followed procedure. This was a minor after all. Something was deeply wrong. But Hannah wouldn't name anyone. No matter how many times she was asked, she remained silent. Not a word, not a clue. Just quiet tears rolling down her cheeks. Everyone assumed it was a boy from school. A classmate. Maybe someone older. Rumors exploded across Maplewood. The once pure image of Hannah Coleman was shattered. People speculated cruel things. Some said she was reckless. Others thought she was hiding a secret boyfriend. A few even accused her of making it all up. But the one person who didn't say anything at all was Darren. Uncle Darren, who had been at her side for every performance, who once called her his little star, suddenly disappeared. He didn't come to the hospital. He didn't call. He didn't send flowers or even ask how she was doing. At first, her family assumed he was just shocked, maybe embarrassed, maybe heartbroken. But as hours turned to days, and his phone went straight to voicemail, concern turned into suspicion. When her father drove to Darren's farmhouse, the place was empty. His truck was gone. The windows were locked. A thin layer of dust had already started to gather on the porch furniture. It was as if he had vanished. Then, only 3 days after Hannah was released from the hospital, her body was found in the woods behind Darren's property. It was a hiker who discovered her, lying still beneath the trees, her hands bound with rope, her neck bruised. Her body was partially covered with branches, as if someone had tried to hide her in a hurry. The shock that ripped through Maplewood was unlike anything the town had ever known. The golden girl was gone. The autopsy confirmed what everyone feared. Hannah had been murdered, strangled. There were signs she had fought back. There were signs of desperation. She was still carrying the baby when she died. The town that once adored her fell into stunned silence. Candlelight vigils were held. Students wore black ribbons. Parents held their children tighter. But beneath the grief was a growing sense of fear and suspicion. The perfect uncle was missing. The beloved girl was dead, and in the wreckage of what once looked like a close family bond was a secret so dark no one wanted to believe it could be true. The police immediately launched a full investigation into Hannah's murder, but from the start, nothing about the case felt ordinary. The crime scene behind Darren's farmhouse was strangely meticulous. The body had been left with an eerie sense of haste, yet intention, hidden just enough to delay discovery, but not so deeply. Buried as to be completely concealed. There were no clear signs of forced entry at the house, no signs of a struggle inside. It was as if Hannah had gone there willingly, as if she trusted the person who would ultimately end her life. Detectives began piecing together Hannah's final days, tracing phone records, reviewing security footage, and speaking to her classmates and family. Her silence about the identity of the baby's father complicated everything. Her journal was recovered from her bedroom, filled with pages of vague sadness, cryptic poems, and disturbing metaphors, but no names, no concrete confessions. Just emotion, scattered and raw. Her phone, however, told a different story. Deleted. Messages were recovered through forensic tools. Many of them were from an unsaved number that was later confirmed to be Darren's. The tone of the texts shifted over time, at first caring and affectionate, then tense, even demanding. Several messages hinted at secrets, promises, and threats cloaked in casual language. In one recovered text, Darren had written, "We just have to keep this quiet. No one can know. Ever." Another simply said, "You're not ruining both our lives over one mistake." The digital evidence began to paint a horrifying picture. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from gas stations, highways, and local businesses. Darren's truck was spotted leaving town the night Hannah died, heading toward a rural interstate. Cameras lost track of him near a state border. He had vanished. Police obtained a warrant to search his farmhouse thoroughly. Hidden in the garage was a small locked box, bolted to the wall behind an old cabinet. Inside, they found dozens of photographs, some of Hannah at family events, others of her at school plays, birthday parties, even candid shots that seemed taken without her knowledge. Alongside the photos was a small necklace she was believed to have lost months earlier, and a notebook filled with disturbing personal writings. They weren't diary entries. They were fixations, obsessive, possessive, and deeply disturbing. There were drawings of Hannah as a woman, standing beside a man who resembled Darren. Some pages described a fantasy life, living in another town, changing names, starting over. There were even plans, half-sketched ideas about disappearing, about protecting her from everyone who wouldn't understand. Darren hadn't just crossed a line. He had constructed an entire secret world around it. He wasn't just a man with twisted intentions. He had convinced himself it was love. The discovery sent shockwaves through Maplewood. The community that once praised Darren as the ideal uncle now recoiled in horror. People began to question every memory, every moment they had witnessed between him and Hannah. Her parents were consumed with guilt. How had they missed the signs? How had they not seen what was happening right under their noses? Detectives widened the search. An alert was issued across multiple states. Darren's face was plastered on every news broadcast. Tips poured in from across the country, sightings, false leads, and rumors. But none led to his arrest. It was as if he had melted into the shadows. Meanwhile, a grand jury was convened to prepare charges in his absence. He was officially wanted for the sexual assault of a minor, unlawful pregnancy, and first-degree murder. As the legal process moved forward, the town descended into mourning and disbelief. Hannah's funeral was held 2 weeks after her body was found. Hundreds attended. Her casket was white, draped in lilies. A picture of her smiling, radiant and full of life, sat on an easel beside it. But behind the tears, behind the prayers, a darker truth lingered. Hannah hadn't just been killed. She had been betrayed in the deepest, most unimaginable way. Her best friend Mia gave a eulogy, struggling through tears. She talked about Hannah's dreams, her kindness, her laughter. She didn't mention Darren by name, but everyone knew what she meant when she said, "She trusted too easily. She loved too purely." And someone took that from her. The aftermath was heavy. The school installed new counseling services. A scholarship was created in Hannah's name, but no amount of memorials could undo what had happened. The Coleman family home became a ghost house. Linda and Martin stopped speaking to most neighbors. Rumors swirled, but few dared to speak them aloud. Some whispered that Darren had planned it for months, that maybe he had even considered taking Hannah away before she exposed him. Others believed he had always been dangerous, just very good at hiding it. Months passed with no sign of Darren. Detectives feared he had fled the country, possibly using false documents. Interpol issued a notice, but with no known accomplices or trail, progress stalled. Still, law enforcement didn't give up. A cold case unit was assigned to monitor leads, and a special agent from the FBI joined the hunt. As they continued combing through Darren's digital footprint, investigators found more disturbing evidence. He had visited obscure internet forums, discussing age-gap relationships, hiding behind anonymous usernames. He had searched for information on pregnancy laws in various states, even researching how long it took for human remains to decompose in woodland areas. Each discovery made it clearer. This wasn't a panicked mistake. It was premeditated. Public opinion shifted dramatically. While Darren had once been the town's favorite mechanic, now he was a ghostly predator. People began revisiting old interactions, wondering what they'd missed. One woman recalled how Darren had once offered to drive her teenage daughter home when her car broke down. Another said he used to bring extra snacks to school events and offer them to girls Hannah's age. It all seemed so innocent until it didn't. As the investigation continued, the question that haunted everyone remained unanswered. Why? Why kill her? Why not run away together if that was his delusion? Why take the life of the one person he claimed to love? The answer, investigators believed, lay in control. Darren had controlled the narrative from the beginning. Who Hannah could trust, where she could go, how she saw herself. When she became pregnant, that control was threatened. If the truth came out, his entire world would collapse. So, instead of facing consequences, he made the choice to silence her forever. But what he didn't realize was that his actions did the opposite. They gave Hannah a voice that echoed louder than ever before. The girl who died in silence became the symbol of everything the town ignored: the warning signs, the misplaced trust, the failure to protect the most vulnerable. And even though Darren was gone, his shadow lingered, etched into every tree that surrounded that farmhouse, every whispered conversation, every tear shed for the girl whose life was stolen too soon. 6 months after Hannah's murder, Maplewood had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The once peaceful, tight-knit town now lived under the weight of suspicion and trauma. Parents became hypervigilant, schools implemented new rules for student safety, and neighbors who used to greet each other with warmth now avoided eye contact. The haunting image of Hannah, young, innocent, full of potential, lingered in everyone's minds. Her story had become a warning, a wound that refused to heal. The manhunt for Darren continued, but it felt like chasing a shadow. Law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly, but every promising lead turned cold. He had been a mechanic by trade, skilled with his hands, resourceful, and quiet. Those qualities that once made him dependable now made him dangerous. He knew how to disappear. Investigators believed he had planned his escape well before committing the crime. They speculated he had been preparing for months, maybe even longer, studying escape routes, hoarding cash, possibly forging identities. New evidence surfaced in small, painful fragments. A toll booth camera in Colorado captured a blurry image of a man resembling Darren 2 weeks after he vanished. He was driving an old sedan with stolen plates, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. A gas station clerk in Utah later claimed to have seen someone matching his description buying canned food and camping gear. But by the time authorities arrived, he was long gone. A more disturbing clue emerged from a laptop found hidden in a storage unit Darren had rented under a fake name. The hard drive contained disturbing video diaries. In them, Darren never mentioned Hannah by name, but he spoke in vague terms about a love the world would never understand, and how they were meant to be free together. He rambled about starting over, about how society wouldn't let them be happy, and how he had to make the hard choice. These recordings chilled investigators to the bone. They weren't confessions in the legal sense, but they confirmed what everyone feared. Darren was fully aware of his actions and had justified them in his own twisted mind. Back in Maplewood, the Coleman family was shattered. Linda rarely left the house, consumed by grief and guilt. Martin quit his job and spent most of his days in silence, sitting on the front porch, staring into nothing. They had lost more than a daughter. They had lost their sense of safety, of reality. Every family photograph that once brought joy now served as a cruel reminder of what was stolen. Holidays passed like shadows. Birthdays were silent. The air in their home was heavy with what-ifs. Hannah's bedroom remained untouched. Her mother couldn't bring herself to change anything. Her makeup still sat on the dresser. Her school bag hung on the back of the chair. The bed was made just as she left it. It became a place of quiet remembrance and unbearable sorrow. Then came an unexpected turn. A tip came in from a small town in northern Arizona. A hiker had found a makeshift camp deep in the woods. Nothing more than a tarp, some clothes, and empty food containers. But among the discarded items was a wallet containing a photograph of Hannah. Investigators rushed to the scene. DNA tests confirmed that Darren had been there. But he was gone again, vanished like smoke. The camp discovery reignited the case. News coverage picked up once more. True crime shows featured Hannah's story. Social media spread awareness with hashtags demanding justice. People from across the country shared similar stories of betrayal and abuse, calling for better protection for minors, stricter background checks for teachers and volunteers, and stronger support for families in crisis. As the investigation expanded, so did the emotional toll. Detectives working the case began to suffer burnout. They were chasing a ghost, trying to bring closure to a community drowning in grief. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Darren hadn't just murdered Hannah. He had meticulously destroyed every trace of the man people once thought they knew. 1 year after Hannah's death, a memorial was held in the town square. A small monument was unveiled, her name etched in stone, surrounded by a garden of white roses. Hundreds gathered, holding candles and wearing white ribbons. A silence fell over the crowd as her parents stepped forward, both barely able to speak. Linda read a short message, her voice trembling. She was our light, and that light was taken from us. But we share her story because silence protects monsters. Speaking up saves lives. That moment sparked change. A local non-profit was established in Hannah's name, dedicated to protecting vulnerable teens, offering them counseling, safe spaces, and education about abuse. Schools implemented workshops on boundaries, consent, and warning signs. Her story became a lesson not just in tragedy, but in the urgent need for awareness and action. Yet even as the town tried to heal, one fact remained. Darren was still free. Months passed. New towns, new whispers. Investigators believed he was living off the grid, possibly surviving with cash and avoiding technology altogether. Every so often, another tip would surface: a gas station sighting, a blurry photo, a suspicious drifter, but none of them confirmed. Then, unexpectedly, a breakthrough occurred. A former co-worker of Darren's, someone who had remained silent, out of fear or guilt, came forward. He claimed that before Hannah's death, Darren had mentioned a property in New Mexico, an abandoned family cabin inherited from a distant relative. It was deep in the desert, far from any major town, with no power, no plumbing, and no cell service. Agents were dispatched immediately. The journey to the cabin was long and treacherous. A single dirt road led into a dusty wasteland. Cactus and dry brush surrounded everything. The heat was unbearable. When the team arrived, the structure was nearly invisible. Collapsed roof, broken windows, sand creeping through every crack. But there were signs of life, fresh footprints, a recently extinguished fire pit, a discarded water bottle. They moved in slowly. Inside, they found a cot, a backpack, and a journal. It was Darren's. Pages filled with paranoid ramblings, drawings of Hannah's face, and entries counting days since the goodbye. He believed he was being followed by spirits of judgment. He wrote about hearing Hannah's voice in his sleep. He confessed to moments of doubt, moments where he considered turning himself in, but always ended with justifications, claiming the world would never understand the purity of their bond. But once again, he was gone. A window had been broken from the inside. He had escaped minutes, maybe hours before the team arrived. The hunt continued. Darren was no longer just a fugitive. He was a symbol of the justice that still hadn't come. His face was everywhere. Wanted posters, digital billboards, news reports. Yet he remained one step ahead. And in Maplewood, Hannah's absence was a constant presence. The town had changed. The people had changed. But they refused to forget. They refused to let her story fade. As long as Darren was out there, justice was unfinished. And everyone knew. It was only a matter of time. 2 years had passed since Hannah Coleman was found murdered behind her uncle's farmhouse, and Darren Nichols had yet to face justice. Time had dulled nothing. For Hannah's parents, the days dragged like lifetimes. Every morning was a reminder of her empty bedroom, her absent voice, her unfulfilled dreams. Every night, Linda dreamed of her daughter's smile, only to wake to silence. The police case remained open, active, and desperate. But what no one knew was that Darren's days were numbered. In a dusty border town between New Mexico and Mexico, an anonymous tip finally changed the course of the case. A call came into a local sheriff's office from a waitress at a roadside diner. A man who had been frequenting the place for weeks kept to himself, always paid in cash, and never used a phone. He had scars on his hands, wore sunglasses at night, and always sat with his back to the wall. What caught her attention wasn't just the man's strange behavior. It was a sketch she saw on a crime show rerun, playing silently on the bar's mounted TV. The face was unmistakable. Darren Nichols. Within hours, federal agents descended on the town, careful to keep their movements discreet. They scoped out the diner, set up surveillance, and confirmed the suspect's presence. He was living under the name James Peters, renting a room above an old tire shop and working odd jobs for cash. He had grown a beard, lost weight, and aged far beyond his years, but his mannerisms, gait, and voice betrayed him. The operation to capture Darren was planned meticulously. Agents feared he might flee across the border. His room was close to a network of migrant trails known to traffickers and fugitives alike. Any mistake could lose him forever, but he never got the chance to run. On a humid Tuesday morning, as Darren walked toward the diner for his usual breakfast, a black SUV pulled up beside him. Before he could react, agents swarmed. In seconds, he was on the ground, cuffed, surrounded, powerless. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. As officers read him his rights, he simply stared at the ground, expressionless, hollow. News of his capture hit Maplewood like a tidal wave. The front page of every newspaper bore the same headline: Darren Nichols caught, Hannah's killer in custody. Crowds gathered outside the Coleman home, lighting candles, leaving flowers, some crying openly. But inside the house, Linda and Martin sat quietly, hands clasped, hearts racing. They had waited years for this moment, and yet when it finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like the beginning of another painful chapter. Darren was extradited to the state where the murder occurred. He faced multiple charges: sexual assault of a minor, unlawful concealment of pregnancy, first-degree murder, and destruction of evidence. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty. The evidence was overwhelming: the journal entries, the hidden photos, the text messages, the DNA at the campsite, the videos found on his laptop. But Darren refused to speak. He wouldn't talk to detectives, his public defender, or the court-appointed psychologist. He entered a plea of not guilty, his voice flat and detached, as if the trial was happening to someone else. His defense attorneys tried to argue mental instability, claiming he suffered from delusions and trauma, but the prosecution quickly dismantled the narrative. This was not a man plagued by confusion. This was a man who had carefully planned a crime, covered it up, and lived in hiding for years. The trial was set to be one of the most high-profile cases in state history. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Cameras lined the street. Journalists from across the country covered the proceedings. When the prosecution began laying out the case, the atmosphere turned somber. Photos of Hannah were displayed. Her journal entries were read aloud. Surveillance footage, phone records, digital evidence. It all led to one undeniable truth. Darren Nichols had groomed, manipulated, and ultimately murdered his own niece to hide an affair that never should have existed. The most heartbreaking moment came when Hannah's mother took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described the last day she saw her daughter alive. She recalled Hannah's laughter, her soft eyes, and how she never suspected that her brother, the man she trusted with her child, was the one who destroyed her family. Linda's testimony brought the courtroom to tears. Even the judge paused to collect himself. But the most shocking twist came near the end of the trial. A former inmate who had shared a cell with Darren during the early weeks of his arrest came forward with a statement. In it, he claimed Darren had confessed everything. Not just the murder, but the months of manipulation, the grooming, and his obsessive belief that Hannah belonged to him. According to the inmate, Darren said he never intended for her to die that night. He had planned to take her away, start over in another state. But when she told him she was ready to tell the truth, that she was going to expose him, he snapped. This testimony sealed the case. After weeks of evidence, witness statements, and emotional testimonies, the jury deliberated for just 7 hours. Darren Nichols was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There were no outbursts, no appeals for mercy, no closing statements from Darren himself. Just silence. As he was escorted out of the courtroom in shackles, Linda and Martin watched from the front row. They didn't speak. There were no cheers. Just tears. Justice had come, but it didn't erase the loss. Nothing could. The prison where Darren would serve his sentence was hundreds of miles away, isolated and heavily secured. He would live the rest of his days surrounded by gray walls, his name forever tied to betrayal and horror. He would never again walk free, never again look into the eyes of someone who trusted him. Back in Maplewood, a new chapter quietly began. The nonprofit created in Hannah's memory expanded statewide. More schools adopted its educational programs. Victims of abuse were coming forward earlier, supported by counselors trained in trauma response. Hannah's name became synonymous with change, not because of how she died, but because of the difference her story made. On the 3rd anniversary of her death, the town held a vigil at the garden built in her honor. It was peaceful, filled with soft music, flickering candles, and silent prayers. Linda placed a single white rose on the memorial stone and whispered, "You're free now." And in that moment, even though the pain still lingered, there was a sense of peace, a quiet strength in knowing that truth had prevailed, that the man who stole her daughter's life would never harm another soul, and that Hannah's voice, though once silenced, now echoed louder than ever.